So all the work that it's interesting that I built one of the, this wonderful connection network of people when I grew up feeling so disconnected,
right,
and feeling abandonment and abuse and sexual and physical and everything in between. And there's a guy years ago that he's a 70-year-old gay man. I never met him in person, but I talked with him on the phone, and he gave me a definition of intimacy, and he spends his time sponsoring people with sexual addictions. And he said, intimacy is a mutual exploration of a shared safe place. Abuse is anything that takes away the safe place, and addictions are what we do to make ourselves feel good when we don't have a safe place. And I thought about that a lot, saying, okay, because I never felt safe when I was growing up, especially if you had any sort of abuse. If you don't hear the words "I love you," if you don't have anyone to go to for help, if you're getting abused, it's very scary. And with narcissists or like even psychopaths, who you're saying, so that definition I just gave, addictions are what we do to make ourselves feel good when we don't have a safe place. Is narcissism a coping mechanism, or is it, how would you describe it in terms of, because I don't know if they feel safe or unsafe, or how to, because I'd like to almost ask you about connection and intimacy from the experience of the narcissist.
In some ways, it's, and again, and Tucker made also, I ate lunch with him, that's why he's featuring this conversation, but he, a lot of it does go back to early experience. Narcissism is made, and it's made by circumstance. These people are not born this way.
Okay, it's made by circumstances.
It's made by circumstance.
Okay.
Now, may a child be born with a temperament that makes them more likely to become narcissistic? Yes. They tend to be a little bit intense, probably like the colicky baby can become a colicky adult kind of thing. Like there is sort of an intensity. They're not an easygoing sort of a kid by any stretch. And some people are, they're just more easygoing. Even if terrible things happen to them, I would say 80% of my clinical population has experienced sexual trauma before the age of 16. It's pretty normative, men and women. And so obviously that does something to boundaries and trust. However, the bulk of them go through the world, they're wonderful parents. It's not like this is a guarantee that this person's all but doomed to a terrible future. They've found their way through it. What they tend to do is be much more self-denigrating. But for many narcissistic individuals, there are early histories characterized by neglect, frank trauma, inconsistency, chaos, but there are also early histories characterized by being spoiled, like too much material indulgence without feeding the emotional needs of the child. Listen, a person of means may want to be able to give their kids a really nice bike and a trip to Disney World and all that, but if at the same time that child is also not being given a rich emotional vocabulary, an opportunity to share feelings in an appropriate way, and parents that are present psychologically more often than not, when you have that indulgence, the overindulgence of the material with the underindulgence of the emotional, that's actually the classical way we create narcissism. And then the people who experience some trauma and neglect. Neglect is a parent who may actually put them in a beautiful home with lots of things and the best schools, but the parents are nowhere to be found. This is a huge problem in Los Angeles. I see it on my kids' peers. I'm like, listen, I worked from the day my oldest Maya was 6 weeks old forward. It was required. I did the best I could, but I'm shocked at people who are like, we're going off for 3 weeks and we're leaving you with top flight nannies. Well, fast forward that 35 years and they're in my office and they're dealing with that trauma of abandonment. They were left with the best caregivers possible. They just weren't their parents.
Right.
And so this is not something that is just a child that's abused and neglected because they're impoverished. This happens across the spectrum. And so I think that narrative often fuels narcissism. Why? The world isn't safe. So that lack of safety fuels insecurity, that unempathic lashing out. And in this way, my goal, and it's a tough one to create, is to say, please be compassionate to narcissistic people because they've often had a rough start, and then get the hell out of Dodge and don't engage them. Because you can't win at that game. So I'm saying you do not need to be cruel. You do not need to call them out in a cruel way. You don't have to do a smear campaign, but you're not going to make this work. So it's you're almost telling two stories at the same, because the narcissist is saying, why doesn't anyone want anything to do with me? I'm like, because you're not a nice person to them. And I understand why you're not a nice person, but that's the balancing act here.
People that are here or will be watching this that are in a relationship with a narcissist currently, or are tethered to one because of exes or relatives or things like that. What suggestion? I mean, you cover this in the book, you know, but I'd love to have you touch on some of this, because I think you just really understand it.
Well, I say things like, I hate to say it, and it's going to sound very dismissive, don't engage with them. A lot of people, once you start engaging, you find yourself defending yourself. You find yourself over-explaining things. There's a classical behavior in narcissistic personality styles called gaslighting. And when a person gaslights you, they deny your reality. The most classical manifestation of gaslighting is when somebody says, you're being too sensitive, or that never happened.
Yep.
You know you're being gaslighted when you start recording conversations with your phone surreptitiously in your pocket for no other reason that you can play it back later and say, I'm not crazy. They really did say that. The number of times people in these relationships will put the text up and say, you see, you said it, to which the narcissist will say, you're a vengeful bitch. You know that? So they'll still turn your evidentiary base into a scathing analysis of your character, okay?
You know what's interesting? I have an individual that I've currently dealing with in my life, that I've recorded conversations for that exact reason, because I know that if it wasn't, this person would say a reality that's not at all reality, and I needed to evidence of that.
So the gaslighting sets this tone in a relationship where you feel chronically invalidated, chronically devalued, and frankly, sometimes downright crazy. You know, again, to the point where you're recording conversations and your house looks like the Pentagon for all the cameras, and they don't care about the reality. Because I will tell you, I've worked with couples, one narcissist, one not, in my office, and they will show video. You say you didn't do that, and they'll play the video. Clearly they said it, and then the narcissist gets up and walks out of the office.
Right.
You see, so they're not going to engage in it. So the engagement is where people get hurt. So I tell people, don't engage. Now, you're saying, how the heck are you supposed to talk to someone if I don't engage with them? So let's say he and I are sharing custody of a child and he's narcissistic. I'm not going to get into how's work going, how you doing? Like 5 o'clock, I'll be there to get the kids. We're done, we're good. He's got all the information he needs, okay? What's wrong with you? Why aren't you talking to me more? Come on. Say, I know, you know, we're good. We have our pickup time now. Your heart's racing as this is happening. This is taking a physiological toll on you if you're dealing with a narcissist. Sorry, but you know, but it's but you know, it's the.
He's a lawyer. He kind of
right, exactly. So I'm not engaging him. Then the other mistake people do is they start explaining themselves. No, what really happened was this, but you misheard, and then I'm like, oh man, you're screwed now. Like you're not coming out of this one.
Right.
Maybe there's a reason why sometimes narcissists are drawn to professions where arguing works, like being a lawyer, because they argue better than anyone, because they're able to lift a lot of the emotion out of situations because they don't bring it in.
Right.
So where we're often arguing from heart, they're arguing from logic, which anyone who's ever been in a relationship knows that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Okay? So I would say don't engage, don't defend, don't explain, and don't personalize. This is them. This is their madness. Leave it housed in them. So while they're like this, you just stay. I always say, in fact, one of my clients put it beautifully. He said, I have a cone of protection I now have. So he literally is like, I imagine a cone on me and it keeps me perfectly still. So while they're going off, I'm completely serene. Right. And I really say, find that inner serenity, meditate, find some sort of mantra you can use while you're dealing with them. You're not even listening to them now. Yeah. They're, and you're like, you know what, it's time to go. It was so good to see you. And you use calm voice. I call it a hostage negotiator voice. You know, it's very easy to inflame them, so you really have to keep evenly toned. And so there's that piece of it too. And also, don't make excuses for them. The reason so many narcissistic individuals get so deep into our hearts and get so deep into our careers is we give them a second chance, a fifth chance, a 55th chance. We make excuses. He had a tough start in life. I say those are two separate conversations. He had a tough start in life, and he's treating you like shit.
Right.
Okay? You don't need to be mean to him. He did have a tough start in life. He is treating you like shit. You need to get out of this relationship.
Yeah, so it's about self-preservation.
Exactly, it's about self-preservation.
The beauty of this, though, is, man, I've become so more aware of noticing this behavior in subtle ways that I never did before. It's almost like when you get really stung by one, then you start to see, you know.
You do start to see it. And you also start to become, especially if you've really been hurt, you know, anyone who's been through a relationship or a really bad business dealing. And I've had it happen in 3 interesting spaces: in a family space, in a professional space, and it turned my career around permanently. It was literally where my career should have gone left and ended up going right, much to my toll, and then it ended up exactly where I wanted it. And then once in a personal space. And I think that what does happen, though, is what you have to be able to endure, and I don't know if you've run into this, Joe, is that once you become the person who identifies that narcissistic individual, whether as colleague, whether as potential partner, friend, whatever, the first play is to distance quickly. You know, I hate to say it, and I've been criticized for this, but I'm just going to put it out there. I called narcissism the second-hand smoke of mental illness, because you're just being near them is probably going to make you sick over time. And it was a recent situation I'd been in professionally. I'm part of an advisory board that convenes regularly in Washington, D.C. around mental health issues. There was one guy, I mean, if narcissism had a smell, it was coming off this guy. Very arrogant, lots of swagger. People who are charming and charismatic terrify me. When I meet a charismatic person, I'm like, I gotta go. You know, all my friends, when I was trying to date, they were kind of like, he's charismatic. I'm like, oh no, absolutely not. And so I was looking, let's find someone awkward who's sitting in the corner, doesn't have friends. That's so my funny guy. And so, you know, what got interesting is that
you should be a spokesperson for every non-charismatic person that wants to date.
Oh, absolutely, because the non-charismatic people are where the magic happens. I mean, they're so sweet and kind and loving. And
I think I understood what you said, that psychopath and sociopath, there may be a CNS or a genetic component with psychopath, and then a environmentally created with sociopath. Do I understand that you're saying there may be, with narcissism, there could be a neuroplastic rewiring? Is it something that we can reverse?
You mean in terms of treatment?
Yep. And have you seen any connection with sensory integration disorder and narcissistic tendencies?
That's a great question. So to your first point, if you look at the research by Elsa Roningstam, and she's at Harvard Medical School, she has written some really neat, really great theoretical and empirically based stuff on narcissism. The biggest problem with narcissism research is it's based on very small sample sizes. So the generalizability of the findings is not so great, because there's not a lot of good treatment work done, because they don't come into treatment. They're 80% more likely to drop out of treatment, so it's hard to do that work. She does believe, though, that there's a potential with a narcissistic individual of what we call a corrective emotional experience. That they have an experience that engages in exactly the kind of rewiring you're talking about. Now, here's where my role in this whole world gets interesting. Because I work more with survivors of narcissistic abuse than I work with the actual narcissists. A lot of people out there with stars in their eyes, with Mr. Charisma that they met at the cocktail party, want to believe that they're going to be the corrective emotional experience. The odds of you being the corrective emotional experience is the odds of you winning your March Madness, ticket. It's not going to happen. You're not going to win in Vegas. You're not going to be the corrective emotional experience. The corrective emotional experience is actually something we as therapists can watch unfold. But even during my lunch period today, I spent 15 minutes talking a narcissist off the ledge, because he's 48, the girlfriend's 22, and he can't get his head around why she doesn't like spending time with him. And I was like, I can give you a couple of reasons, but I'm sorry you're hurt, And so it's that entire, I don't think, and this is the 4th time I've walked him through this rodeo with 4 different inappropriately young women. And so he's not getting it. Now, I hate to say it, but sadly, sometimes the corrective emotional experience can be a tragedy. It can be losing someone significant to you. We don't want to program that for, well, once your kid dies, I'm sure everything's going to turn around for you. We don't want that as an intervention. So it's the question of, does that happen every so often? The stars line up. Going to prison can sometimes be that corrective emotional experience. I'd say for about 2 out of 10 narcissists that go to jail or prison, it ends up being a wake-up call, I don't want to do that again, and I've let everyone down. So I think that in a very small subset, because of the lack of self-reflective capacity in narcissists, they don't have the ability. Empathy is equal parts out and in. The out part is me caring. Joe, are you okay? Did you eat enough lunch? Is he, is he bored right now? Like, I'm worried about Joe, I'm worried about all of you. But the in part is, am I reflecting on my contribution to this? Like, am I aware of how I'm reacting? Am I aware of my stuff? They can't do either. They can't do the out, they can't do the in. But so there is some possibility for that. In terms of sensory integration stuff, we could even argue this and extend it to people who are on the spectrum, right? There is a lot of argument. Like, people say to me, what's the difference between autism spectrum and narcissism? There's a big difference, okay? People on the spectrum have a processing issue. They cannot uptake and process social interaction and other environmental stimuli the same way because of a central nervous system issue that we're still trying to fully unravel. That said, in a child or an adult with autism spectrum, when the empathic miss is pointed out to them, they do not become defensive, they do not become angry. They very quickly say, I didn't know. And sometimes will express very authentic emotion at the thought that they may have hurt someone. We see this all through the age span. And immediately that's when we know. Because I have a lot of folks who come in, women who will say, I don't know if my husband's on the spectrum. I don't know if he's narcissistic. So we'll try some stuff. I'll give him questions to try with him the next week. And we're pretty much able to unplug it. So that processing issue means that they can integrate new information and say, I'm so sorry I hurt you. I just didn't know. And so and I think that would also go to other sensory integration experiences. Yeah, that would be my guess.
That's what I'm wondering about, because I've seen that the retraining of sensory integration disorder, but it's a minimum kind of a 2-year.
Yeah.
You're really on the spectrum,
Yes.
and that survival mentality is number one.
Right.
It's a 2-year rewiring process before you kind of go, okay, we can hang out together a little. No.
And it's the same in narcissism. Any published research shows people have been in therapy for 18 months to 24 months. Good luck finding an insurer that's going to pay for that. And so you've got almost 2 years of multi-time a week therapy, and still only a subset of those clients improve. No one's got that kind of access. So on a population level, I'm not clear on how we're going to improve this.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this video, and I want to let you know that I have a new book that's come out, and if you'd like to get it absolutely free, there's a link below in the description, or you can wait till the end of this video, or you can simply go to joesfreebook.com and you can get a copy there. So my question is, and then I'm going to come to ADD, because I definitely, we cannot have this interview without talking about that, because there's so many people here that identify with distractibility. So how does one change the atmospheric conditions of their life in a positive way? Because there's a lot of people running the world right now that are creating the worst shitstorms on the planet. Yeah. And so I just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, so the first thing is to recognize that there's a problem. Now, a lot of people don't recognize it. They keep trying to run away from it. And one way to run away from recognizing that there's a problem is that you become addicted. So for example, we did this the first time we spoke, but let me do it with this audience, okay? I'll give you a definition of addiction that I don't think is controversial. So an addiction is manifested in any behavior in which a person finds temporary relief or pleasure and therefore craves, but then suffers negative consequences, and they have difficulty giving it up despite the harm. So it's pleasure, relief, therefore craving, short-term, long-term harm, inability to get up. That's what addiction is. I said any behavior. I didn't say drugs. It could include drugs. Of course it does. Cocaine, heroin, crystal meth, nicotine, caffeine, alcohol. But it could also be gambling, the internet, pornography, sex, relationship, work. And in this culture, workaholism is rewarded, like my workaholism was rewarded, shopping, any range of human behaviors. The issue is not the activity, it's the internal relationship. Pleasure, craving, relief, harm, inability to give it up. So I'm going to ask you guys a question here. If, according to that definition, you recognize that sometime or another you had some kind of an addictive pattern in your life, just raise your hand. Okay, again, it's virtually everybody here. Now, the next question I ask is not what's wrong with the addiction, which we know, but what's right about it. What does it give you in the short term? In the short term, what does it give you that you like? Okay, I wonder if a couple of people just raise their hand and then shout out their answer, okay? What does it give you in the short term? Or what did it give you? I'm not gonna ask you what you're addicted to or how long or when, just what did you, when you were in it, temporarily, what does it give you? Anybody?
Serenity.
Serenity, okay, thank you.
Feels good.
So a good feeling, pleasure, yeah.
Dopamine hit, of course.
Which means excitement, yeah.
Stimulant. Escape.
Escape, thank you. Escape from what? Escape from distress. Escape from emotional pain. Serenity, a sense of aliveness, escape from pain. Are these good things or are they bad things? In themselves. The good things, they're the things we all want. They're the things we all deserve, actually. They're all the things we should have had as children. Which means that the addiction wasn't your primary problem. Your addiction was an attempt to solve the problem. Therefore, to talk about addiction either as an inherited disease or some kind of a choice that people make, and by the way, there are millions of people in jail in this country because of this social belief that addiction is some kind of a choice for which people should be punished. No, it ain't. It's an attempt to deal with life problems such as emotional pain. And so if you want to understand addiction, you have to look at the atmosphere again, as Don Wood says, that people grew up under and what they're trying to escape from. So first we have to recognize that there's a problem and not run away from it. Secondly, we have to accept compassionately all parts of ourselves, all aspects of ourselves, whether we like them or not. Because all aspects of ourselves, whether we like them or not, they came along for a reason. And if we ask the question compassionately, you might do something that you're not proud of. Excuse me. If you ask yourself the question compassionately, why did I do that? What need was it serving? What was my organism trying to deal with? You'll find the answer. If you ask the question, so you can ask the question two ways. Why did I do that? Or why did you do that? Do you think there's going to be an answer? No, because that's not a question. That's an accusation against somebody else or against the self. And as one of my spiritual teachers says, only when compassion is present will people allow themselves to see the truth. Now, if you ask somebody else, not, why did you do that? But, I know you're a good person trying to do your best. Any idea why you did that? Well, that's a question. And the same with yourself. If you put to yourself, no, why did I do this? But, I wonder why I did this. That's what a compassionate inquiry is. Yeah. And my belief is that the answers are within all of ourselves. They actually are. And if we are compassionate with each other, which is so much of what you talk about, and if we're compassionate with ourselves, then the answers will emerge. So that's the beginning, is to recognize there's a problem and to be compassionate about examining the sources of that problem.
All right, so when you hear the term toxic person, what comes to mind? Thoughts, words, images? Selfish? Negative. Mike Koenigs, all right. So for those of you that struggle to come up with a word or idea behind this, I'm gonna rephrase this a little. Can you think of somebody in your life who you choose to limit your time and attention with because they are draining and because they kind of suck the life out of you? How about the Debbie and Donnie Downers of the world? The people that are negative about everything and everyone. What about an employee? I was listening to a podcast recently, and the guy actually referred to a wrong fit employee as a swamp monster. Somebody that makes you want to drain the swamp to get rid of the problem. What about a business partner? Somebody who you know down in your gut that it is the wrong fit for you, but for whatever reason, you have not found a way to part ways even though every interaction leaves your sanity tested. So that today is what we are going to call toxic people or toxic relationships. So I want to take it one step further and actually put a little spin on this. By having just one toxic relationship in your life, think about how much that productivity in dollars is worth to you. That's what makes this a $250,000 idea, because just a couple hours for most of you in this room of lost productivity is like just tossing thousands of dollars out the window. So when you think about when you're stressed out, burnt out, and not yourself, how much is that worth? How expensive is that? So today I'm going to actually share with you a very, very personal story about not only how a negative toxic person can affect your life, but also 3 key ways that I have found that can help you free yourself of a toxic relationship. So there's a date and time that I will never forget. That date is December 11th of 2016, a mere 74 days ago. It was a call from my brother to say that our youngest sister died. Gone, taken from us at the ripe young age of 17. She had fought a battle with cystic fibrosis her whole life, but as you can see from the outside looking in, she was a normal, healthy kid. Imagine how you would have felt in this situation. For me, my shock turned to devastation, devastation to tears, and tears to guilt. Guilt, because I allowed a toxic person, a toxic situation, to take a relationship from me. And in my personal situation, it was my father. Maybe you can think of a time where you have had to deal with a toxic family member. You know, I look at it and toxic people are takers. When you're looking at givers versus takers, toxic people take. For me, my dad took my confidence. He took my financial freedom at such a young age that no other person should have to deal with at that point in their life. So again, maybe you have been faced with a toxic family member, and if you have, you may have been faced with the most difficult but most necessary decision to have to cut them from your life. So during a time of grief, I was also faced with another emotion, and that was fear. I was going to have to go to this funeral, and I was going to have to face my father, somebody who's caused a lot of pain and anguish in my life. And you know, I was gearing up for this funeral, and all I could think about was, okay, I need a power word. So I was literally Googling power words, something to get me through this time. I was leaning towards strength or courage because those 2 words just seemed to make a lot of sense for what I was going through. And then a single solitary F word hit me in the face, and it's not the F word that we hear a lot around here. It was freedom. Freedom from toxicity, freedom from fear, and freedom from allowing anyone or anything to ever impact me negatively again. And that's what brings me to my first point that I have for you in dealing with toxic people. It's to free yourself from the bounds that they place. Now I'm going to piggyback on Craig, and I'm going to make everybody close their eyes. So close your eyes. And I want you to think about a toxic person or people from your life. And I want you to think about the negative emotion that comes with that. Now I want you to imagine releasing that person from your life. You're no longer dealing with fear, frustration, anxiety, depression. You're no longer interrupted by that person or people. Now open your eyes. How does that release feel? Is it freeing? Do you feel less stressed, more sane? There's actually a quote out there. I'm not sure who wrote this. I wish I could give it credit somewhere. But it says, respect yourself enough to walk away from anything that no longer serves you, grows you, or makes you happy. It's like Joe says all the time, be willing to destroy anything in your life that isn't excellent. And that brings me to my second key point here, and it's to break the cycle of toxic relationships before it starts or before it gets so out of control that you don't know how to go back. So what do they say? They say it takes 21 days to make a habit. It took me 24 years to break one. 24 years old, I found myself in a marriage where I literally cried almost every single day from verbal, emotional, and near physical abuse. And at the time I wasn't pregnant, so I didn't have an excuse to cry every day like I do now, my poor husband. But that's where this F word comes back into play. Can you think of a time where a light bulb has gone off in your head and you're like, you know what? I am allowing something to happen in my life that is not okay. It goes against my values. And you know what? Enough is enough. That's exactly where I was at. And that's where the F word comes back into play. When I reflect back on that time in my life, it wasn't strength or courage that allowed me to leave that relationship. It was freedom. It was that feeling of freeing myself from a toxic relationship and being able to move forward. And you know what? It felt darn good. So that brings me to my third and final point in helping you to deal with toxic relationships in your life. And that is that no matter how dark of a situation you are in and how dark the person is that you are dealing with, there is some silver lining. There is something positive for you to focus on. And by shifting your mindset, that is where the breakthroughs come in. That's where your insights come into play. Can you think of a time where you have had to free yourself from a toxic relationship? And can you think of the consequences that came with that? Was it in the form of a lost relationship like I had with my sister? Again, a simple shift in mindset, focusing on the gains versus the losses, that is what is going to help get you through. Because you know what I gained? When I left my husband and I cut my father from my life, I gained an awesome husband who's my rock. I gained a little girl who is the light of so many people's lives. That's her unicorn hair, by the way. Like, she literally tells me to put a unicorn in. I have another girl on the way. I started a business that fulfills my passions. My income more than doubled, but more than anything else, I gained freedom. Freedom from feeling judged in how I deal with toxic people. Freedom from allowing anybody to affect me in that negative way. Freedom to say I love you to somebody before I can't anymore. So my action for you is to decide, what does your freedom look like from toxic people and toxic relationships, and act on it today. Not tomorrow, not next week, next month, today. And then take the negative energy that you are applying to that situation and put it to good use. Dive into your passions. Spend time with people that give you energy and excitement for life, because that's all you've got. When I walked into my sister's funeral, I'll never forget how I felt. I had decided consciously when I walked in there that no matter what, when, why, how, whatever context I interacted with my father again, because I knew it will happen in the future, it didn't matter who he was, because I was free. I knew within a couple minutes he was the same manipulative person even at his own daughter's funeral, but that was okay because I was free of that. So there was a song that played at the funeral that I'll never forget the lyrics. It said, I owned every second that this world could give. I swear I lived. Own every second that this life can give you. This is your life, and you have the freedom to do with it or with whom you please.
Geniuses. Relationships are the key to success in your business and in your life. Now, why is Genius Network the most sought after network and mastermind? Well, it's the relationships. But really, why? Why are the relationships themselves so important? Well, as Dan Sullivan and Ben Hardy have shared with us, relationships are your who. And it's the who's in your life that lead to a growing or declining business, a thriving and supportive marriage, or one heading towards divorce, and is the place that you fulfill the most fundamental need of being connected.
You took my part.
Wait, what?
That was supposed to be my line.
No, I said right before this that I was going to do that part. So you didn't listen. Just go with it.
You always say I'm not listening. That's not true.
No, stop. I can't believe you're doing this in front of Genius Network.
Because I'm not going to be the one to apologize. You always make me apologize.
Well, it's not my fault, so I'm not going to.
Fine. How many of you can relate to having any argument ever with someone close to you? You can go ahead and type in the chat if you have ever had an argument with someone close to you. And then there's the period of time after the argument where you feel disconnected, both physically, emotionally. You feel upset or hurt by things they said or how they said it. You can even feel guilty for how you acted or how you showed up during the disagreement. We call this the argument hangover. It's that period of time between having an argument and fully resolving it emotionally. Even think about the topics that sparked a disagreement. A lot of times they're not life-altering things or things that are actually that important to you, but how you act during the disagreement is what creates that argument hangover period. And how long does that last for you? Is it hours, days, weeks, months? We've heard couples being in argument hangovers till they are able to fully resolve it and reconnect. And here's the thing, as the leaders and entrepreneurs that you are, during this argument hangover period, you're not as creative. You're not showing up as the most inspiring leader. You're not modeling the best relationship you could to your children, right? So the impact of the argument hangover is even beyond how you feel. So then people mostly only see two choices. One, avoid getting into conflicts altogether, or avoid that person. Slowly stop talking to them as much or be more distant from them. Slowly, the relationship can dissolve. How many potentially great who's have been eliminated from your life because of the argument hangover?
And this topic is so impactful right now that we were given a book deal earlier in this year for the argument hangover, which actually hits shelves now on February 2nd. So this 10-minute talk is Fighting Smarter 101. And in the next 7 minutes, you're going to know how to keep argument hangovers from ruining the most important relationships in your life. You're going to have the 5R process to fully repair from any argument hangover and feel prepared to handle any challenge with the certainty that you can strengthen that relationship.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this video, and I want to let you know that I have a new book that's come out, and if you'd like to get it absolutely free, there's a link below in the description, or you can wait till the end of this video, or you can simply go to joesfreebook.com and you can get a copy there.
Now, getting honest here and go ahead and type in the chat, would you consider yourself a great communicator?
We want to know, type it in the chat.
So we'll give you a second to type that in there. Yes, 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 sometimes. And honestly, this is a place to be authentic and no judgment here. So taking a look, and we have to be honest with all of ourselves, we're a little biased in our own favor because it's easy to communicate when people do what you want them to. So if people are agreeing with you, they're always a yes to your requests. Is that really being a great communicator? See, masterful communicators strengthen relationships when there isn't agreement, when people do not agree with you, when they don't do exactly what you ask them to, when they don't see things your way. Now, Chris Voss in Never Split a Difference said, life is a negotiation, and negotiation is a game of empathy. So masterful communicators, truly masterful, do not avoid conflicts. They lean into the conversation, they stay in communication, and they seek to be more understanding and be more empathetic to use that opportunity to actually strengthen that relationship.
Now, being empathetic sounds nice in theory, but what often happens instead is you do more damage by how you fight than the original cause. And here's something that's important to say for those that think, oh, I don't do damage, I just get quiet. Getting quiet and shutting down can do just as much damage because it isolates the other person. So how do you know that you're doing damage from how you fight? Well, ask yourself things. Do people in your life ever feel conversations go unresolved? Do they ever feel invalidated or misunderstood? Do people ever feel resentment is building up between you two? Important questions to really reflect on for yourself. The goal, though, is not to avoid conflict, but to shorten the argument hangover period. Now, it's counterintuitive to people to think you shouldn't avoid conflict. No, because conflict is actually where innovation can happen. Conflict is where there can be a deeper level of understanding yourself, the other person, and in romantic relationships, Healthy conflict can lead to more intimacy and a deeper connection between you two. So instead of avoiding those benefits, focus on shortening that argument hangover period, which again is how long you're disconnected, both physically and emotionally. But you need a process for this, a process to repair, because saying I'm sorry is not enough. Sorry to say it to you, sorry, but saying I'm sorry isn't enough, because number one, if you always default to that, it starts to mean less to the other person. And two, it doesn't really show them that anything was learned for there to be change in the future.
That process is the 5 R's to repair from a conflict. So the first R is to reflect. Request a pause for yourself to consider expectations and the root cause. So here you are in a conversation, and it's getting to a place that's really not constructive because you're both really reacting. So I would say to Jocelyn, you know what, I think we just need to take a pause here. We'll come back to this in about 2 hours. Now, for those of you reflecting, you may also currently be in an argument hangover with somebody else. So you can reflect now about that relationship if you really want it to strengthen. So what you're going to reflect on is your disappointments, because all disappointments in your life and in your relationship come from unmet expectations. Mm-hmm. Now, often you aren't even aware of your unmet expectations in the moment. So it's not clear to you, so you're not even going to share it, so they go unexpressed. Mm-hmm. And this is often what causes us to react, to have emotional triggers. So you're reflecting on what expectations that go unmet do I have about myself or this person, and what's the real root cause of either this conflict or being in an argument hangover with this person. So then the second R, while you're taking this personal time, is responsibility for the role you played and the impact your actions had. So this person was in a conversation with you. So that means you were a part of it. Now, I know often some of us say, well, it was their fault. They started it. Now, it is not a question of if you had responsibility. As a leader, you will look at where you had responsibility, where you can take responsibility for the actions and the things that you said that had the impact on them. Now, it's not a place to say, oh, well, that wasn't my intention, or why did you take it that way? No. Can you take responsibility that what you said and what you did had the impact that it did on them, and have the responsibility for that?
So the third R, after those first two, which are on your own, now you're coming back to reconnect, and you're going to share where you're taking responsibility and validating their perspective. Now, here's what's tricky about this step. That part of us, we can call it the ego, in that argument hangover period can want to stay distant. You may not feel like reconnecting because you're still frustrated. You still feel like they need to say something to make it better. But the goal here is to reconnect faster. In our experience with thousands of couples, a lot of times the relationship dissolving isn't always because they're fighting too much. You know what it's related to? They're not reconnecting fast enough after a disagreement. And so resentment builds between them the longer that the two of them wait to reconnect. Now, when you come to them, you're not saying, all right, tell me what you learned. Tell me how you're sorry for what happened. You're going to start with, hey, here's where I'm taking responsibility. I reflected, here's what I realized, and validate their perspective. Was there a place that you were unwilling to acknowledge how they felt or how they saw the situation?
The fourth R is to remind. Remind this person of what your commitment is to the relationship and what your agreements are. So this is the place that also goes kind of overlooked, because we think of relationships at times as the function that serves us. But what is your larger purpose? What is your commitment to that relationship? So I might say to Jocelyn, inside of all this, my commitment to you is that you feel supported and that you feel loved. And my commitment to the relationship is that we both live the lives that we know we came here to live.
I'm on board for that.
So sharing your commitment for the relationship, as well as reminding of what your agreements are. Now, right there, you might have thought, well, I don't have agreements for this relationship. Perfect. This is a time to put in place agreements you have between the two of you. And if you do have agreements, for example, Jocelyn and I have agreements in times of conflict of not to raise our voice, not to swear, and not to turn our back and just leave the room without saying when we'll come back. So we remind each other if we forgot the agreements or if they're broken, we remind each other to come back to them.
So the fifth R is to reconcile. Reconcile the conflict into opportunity. You can either see conflict as something that shouldn't happen, that tears you apart and you resist it, or you can see conflict as something that leads to more connection, more understanding yourself, healing something between your relationship, and those new ideas and solutions can come from that. So together, can you look at what new opportunity showed up because of this disagreement? So let's look at your personal commitment. If you would type in the chat, which step are you going to commit to being even better at in your relationships? Is it reflecting more, not just brushing things under the rug, but actually reflecting on the disagreement? Is it taking responsibility? Is it aiming to reconnect faster and not letting it be days before you reconnect? Is it reminding people in your life of what you're committed to? Or is it starting to reconcile that conflict is an opportunity instead of something that shouldn't happen? All right, so since it's a little hard to see the chat, I'm gonna guess there's a mix of it all. Thank you for typing in the chat.
Now, implementing this 5R process will keep unresolved argument hangovers from ruining the most important relationships in your life. And as Ben Hardy wrote in Who Not How, relationships are the purpose of life. So as now a masterful communicator, someone committed to great relationships and great who's, you don't avoid conflict. You seek to shorten your argument hangover period, as well as not have them escalate through the things that you say rather than just what the root cause was. And you stay engaged in the conversation. You get more understanding as you see this as an opportunity to truly strengthen that relationship. And by doing so, you can live a truly successful and fulfilling life.
Almost all the time, they don't say, how's your relationships? How's your sleep? How's your kids? How's your career? How's your job? They immediately give you a structural diagnosis. Now, most of them are trying to do all they know. They're not trying to purposely keep people in pain. They just don't understand the mechanism, what causes this, even the people that are trained in this for years. Let me introduce my friend Steve Ozanich. So Steve Ozanich, spelled O-Z-A-N-I-C-H. Steve Ozanich is a mind-body healing health consultant, teacher of presence, spiritual researcher, and author of 5 books. His first book, The Great Pain Deception, became an international bestseller. His second book, Dr. John Sarno's Top 10 Healing Discoveries, was written as a homage to the late Dr. John E. Sarno, who forever transformed the medical industry with his discovery of TMS, the mind-body syndrome. Steve's third book, Back Pain Permanent Healing, Understanding the Myths, Lies, and Confusion, was an Amazon #1 bestseller. Over the past 23 years, he's helped to teach thousands of sufferers how to heal themselves through his lectures, books, articles, videos, and interviews. So welcome, Steve. We're gonna hand this mic back and forth. This is not something that I've ever seen you done, get in front of a group of people and talk. And so because he lives here in Ohio, I insisted that he get his ass down here in person and talk to people. He talks to lots of people, but usually not in groups. And he's been interviewed by some pretty prominent individuals. And this guy really knows his stuff. He's a wonderful human. He's been through his own journey of hell, and through that process, figured out something that most people that are in the pain business don't understand at all. And I cannot tell you how many really brilliant doctors that are usually the most resistant to it, including chiropractors, including physical therapists, including surgeons, that have struggled and suffered with pain, that could not get out of pain. And I've introduced them to Steve. And the ones that listen, and many don't, and I'll say, do a call with this guy, do a session with this guy, read his book. If they do, and they believe, the pain in many cases doesn't just minimize, it goes away. I could go on and on. I could spend half an hour just telling stories, and I have a tendency to want to do that right now. But I want to just ask you, tell us who you are, what you do.
Sure. Thanks, by the way, for the beautiful invitation. Has anybody heard of that phrase TMS that he just mentioned? Yeah. Looks like the people that know me. It's a very important phrase. It could save your lives someday, actually. And it has saved many lives. I guess my story is a good place to start, right? Yeah. I was in severe pain for 30 years. Started in the low back. And of course, I did the normal routes. I tried everything. Acupuncture, physical conditioning, physical therapy, core strengthening, hanging upside down like a bat. I always tell people I did that, inversion tables are called. But I never tried to suck the blood out of anyone's neck. And of course, hundreds of chiropractic adjustments. I think I bought some houses for chiropractors. And everything works for a little while. Everything. But nothing was working permanently. But in the late 1990s, my pain got so bad that I was crippled. I was crawling around on my hands and knees, and my left leg was paralyzed. I had the quadricep and the knee on there, but I lost the hamstring and the calf and the foot on that side. The deep tendon reflexes were gone, no sensation. I drug it around for a year. And of course, I was putting off the inevitable. Surgery was coming. It was obvious. So I think I was 2 weeks out from the last surgical consult when a friend of mine showed me an article. He said, "This reminds me of you." So I looked at it. It was by some doctor named John E. Sarno from the New York University Medical Center. So I went home and I got Sarno's book and I started to read it and I saw his implications and I threw the book against the wall. The very book that was going to save my life. I rejected it. And as Joe knows, 90% of the people who do reject it. What I'm going to tell you works every time, but only 10% of the people can see it, which is okay because there's different levels of consciousness. It's all about consciousness. Certain people can see it and go, "Oh, that's me." Now, I didn't see it at first. Actually, maybe I did see it. That's why I threw the book, right? Mm-hmm. And so I got worse, of course. And I quit eating. My family was freaking out because I was down like 50 pounds. And I've been a trainer my whole life. I was down 50 pounds. And so I went back and I looked at that book of Dr. Sarno. It's called Healing Back Pain. And it connected. Tears were flowing. It was powerful. But this beautiful man had given me the answer. So I started doing what he said, and it didn't happen as easily as it happens for most people. There was no one like me to come to. But I healed eventually by following the advice, and I ended up writing that book, The Great Pain Deception.
Yep.
And getting his endorsement was tougher than healing. Dr. Sarno, he didn't endorse things at all. He was just a medical doctor. But it's done well out there. Many, many tens of thousands of people have healed from it. And I wrote a couple follow-up books. One was an homage, like you said, to him. Mm-hmm. And the third one was called Back Pain Permanent Healing. I had more to say after a 400-page book. There was some more I still wanted to say. So his discovery was something he called TMS, which originally stood for tension myositis syndrome. He was very frustrated and upset with his results. He was actually a physiatrist at the New York University Medical Center. He was so frustrated with the results of his work that surgery wasn't working permanently and therapy wasn't working and on and on and on. So he did something unique in modern medicine. He went and looked deeper. And he took the files out of his back pain patients. And he noticed, they've got other health problems too. They've got allergies. They've got, sleep problems. They've got skin problems. They've got stomach problems. So he did something even more unique today. He began to talk to them, which is very rare. I have people say to me, "My doctor never looked at me." Came into the room, looked at the chart, scribbled something out, and walked right out. But he was an old man, so he was old school. And he started to notice tendencies in these people, personalities. It's a personality problem. He's a paragon of it. He noticed these people tend to be perfectionistic, goodists, strivers. They push themselves to win, to succeed, to learn, to know, to understand, keep everybody happy. But what they didn't know was that they were furious inside about all that. We despise every minute of that. As Carl Jung said, there's another within us whom we do not know. There's two people here. There's the one that we show the world, which Freud called a superego, Jung called a persona. This outer face that we show everybody, it's to please people, mainly the parents, and then by extrapolation, everybody else in the world. And so these people who tend to have this personality type, we call a type T person, which stands for tension. They had all kinds of health problems. They were magnets for anger, tension, but they didn't know it because the process is all unconscious, which means you don't know it. It's outside of your awareness, outside of your consciousness. And so that's probably the main reason people don't believe it, because they can't feel anger and these things. Now, yes, they feel stressed out sometimes, but they don't understand the magnitude of it. And so he discovered when he started telling his patients, you know what? I don't think there's anything wrong with your back. I don't care about that disc herniation or that stenosis or that spondylolisthesis or the spondylolysis or the spondylitis or the quad equinus syndrome or the prolapse disc or the sequestered disc, whatever label they want to give it. I think this is your brain diverting your attention to your physical body and away from this rage. And he said he was astounded when he told his patients that they began to heal. He couldn't understand it. He said, I was mystified. That was the word he used. That the knowledge of what's going on was the healing mechanism. You don't have to do anything else. Now, it makes sense because what the brain is trying to do is divert your attention to the physical, whether it's feet, knees, hands, shoulders, doesn't matter, and away from the emotional, which, once again, is outside of the awareness of the individual. So it makes sense why we would reject it, because it's helping us. He said, it's a favor your brain is doing for you. It's trying to help you cope through your daily life so you don't have to deal with all this crap that you're putting on yourself. And so if it's trying to help you, why would anybody want to get rid of it? You know? So you can look at pain or disease as an emotional crutch that's helping you walk each day, and people don't want their crutches kicked out from underneath them. So about 10% of the people believe it statistically. Well, let me say this. Everybody believes what I'm saying is true, except when it comes to them. No, I got a hernia. My doctor told me I had a bad back. You're right. But my back's bad. Or my shoulder's bad, you know. And so he called his discovery TMS, originally for tension myositis syndrome, which means muscle tension. But as he got better at what he did, he changed that phrase TMS to tension myoneural syndrome, which is muscles and nerves, because he realized there's tendon involvement as well. But towards the end of his long life, he changed that phrase TMS to the mind-body syndrome, because he realized it's everything. Your immune system, the cancers, the autoimmune things, because they were healing like crazy. And so that's one of the things I like to talk about. It's not just pain.
Yeah.
It's not just pain. It's everything, which sounds so panaceic. You know, if it's too good to be true, it's got to be wrong, right? But it works. It's almost like this E equals MC squared that Einstein discovered, this little phrase, TMS. He figured it out. And guess what? Everybody hated him. Mm-hmm. The medical industry mocked him. He worked at NYU. They mocked him and ridiculed him. They turned their back on him. They wouldn't even eat lunch with him. because his sin was helping millions of people to heal. And of course, the people don't want to heal it for what I just talked about. It's protecting you. He's got a famous, there's a lady named Helen that was a famous patient of his. She was crippled with hip and back pain so bad that she couldn't function. She was actually bedridden for over 2 years, which is a tough, I was close to that, 2 years. They heard about him in New York. And if you went up to see him, he knew whether you needed psychotherapy or just go to his lectures. He had a weekly lecture. Well, when the family said she's been bedridden, he said, I don't think the lectures are going to get it. Maybe you better talk to somebody. Something deep happening here. So under deep psychotherapy, she had remembered being molested by her father, 5 years old. Well, they sent her to an incest support group. And she got worse in the group. Worse, and she panicked. She said, Dr. Sarno, I believe you. I believe this is TMS. I believe this is the cause. But I'm not getting better with your knowledge therapy like you said we were supposed to do, the understanding. But her husband was standing there, and he said to her, you're talking about 42 years of repression. And when she heard that, something in her brain clicked, and she collapsed. She said she was on the ground shaking like this. She was watching her life flash before her eyes. She was yelling to her husband, I want to die. Let me die. Please let me die. And in the next breath, hold me. Please hold me. Oh, what is it? Which one do you want? So within a couple minutes, all her pain disappeared forever. So he realized, okay, this is a protective barrier. Our health problems, knee, foot, hand, shoulder, whatever it is, it's protecting you from things you don't want to see. And of course, everybody came into his office after that. He said, wanted to do the Helen thing. You reach into me and take this out so I can just whistle away from here. But he said, we tried it for decades. It doesn't work. It was the only case he ever saw where the unconscious burst into consciousness and it was healed. They only saw one case of it. I've seen one since he's passed away. But we have to do it through consulting and books and through knowledge, things like that. And so when I wrote this book, I thought, I'll help a few people heal, I didn't have any idea it was going to take off like that, or how many other health problems were going to be healed from it. I just had a couple driving from Pennsylvania, took me to dinner because their cancer went away, both of them, husband and wife. I just helped a lady get her hearing back from Redondo Beach. She went deaf. Very interesting case. A guy from Wisconsin named Joe. He signed on to Zoom. He was so thin. I almost shocked. He looked like an Auschwitz prisoner. And I thought, wow, this guy's suffering, but I don't want to gasp. It's not a good way to start a consultation by gasping. But he could see the bones in his face. And he proceeded to tell me that he would eat foods and he would have a reaction to them, swelling and all kinds of things. His wife had rushed him to the hospital and his family, and they were scared to death of having me eat anything. And so all food has histamine in it. Chicken and rice happen to have low histamine in it. So his doctors told him he had a histamine intolerance and that he should try chicken and rice. So he had been eating chicken and rice every day for 5 years. That was it. And that made me understand why the thinness. But I said to him immediately, there's no such thing as histamine intolerance. Forget about all the labels in health that are crippling us. There's no such thing. Your mind has bought into it with the help of your physician. And he said, that's not why I'm here. I said, yeah, wow, that's not why he was here. He said, during this time, I went through a car wash and they put that cherry smell on top of the car to make it smell better. He said, it triggered a chemical response in my nose. And he said, it was like they took a bucket of molten lava and poured it over top of my head. Every nerve in my body was on fire. The entire body was on fire. Burning is one of the common symptoms of TMS that Steve had. Remember this surgeon? And of course, I told him there's no such thing as a chemical sensitivity. Your mind is bought into it, okay? These are all mind things. Well, he didn't kind of buy into what I told him that day. He was hoping, like most people, tell me to do X, Y, and Z so I can get better. It doesn't work that way. But the next day, he sent me a very nasty email. It was beautifully written. I almost congratulated him on what a good job he did. It was 2 pages long. It's like, you don't know what you're doing here. You're talking about consciousness and yogis and all this stuff. So I need money to live, but his life was worth more than a few $100s. So I sent him his money back to make a point. I said, you don't want to heal. I explained to you. Though, by the way, there's the only people that don't heal, the ones that don't want to, which is quite a few of them. And he said, what do you mean I don't want to heal? I said, I explained it to you. I've seen it working for 23 years now. People just like you, not that thin. But he reflected on what I said, and a few days later, he healed. He got out an egg, he told me. And his wife and friends were going, don't do it, don't do it. I have this vision of, I was thinking comedic terms. And he's trying to eat this egg, and there's all these people holding his arm back, suicide by egg. Because they had rushed him to so many hospitals. Don't do it. He said, Steve said I can eat anything I want. Well, he ate the egg, and he said, that's like the greatest egg of all eggs in the history of eggs. You could imagine eating something different because change, human beings need change. We have to have it. Nothing happened. So he got out. He said one of the things he wanted was dilly bars. So he got like 6 of them and ate them. And his wife was worried he was going to get fat now, which is actually the same problem on the other end, because it's the same thing as addiction, the same mechanisms of causes and effect. Okay? But he's fine. He's fine. Now he's not like me. He went out all these what they call histamine intolerance groups on Facebook and all this stuff. And of course, they throw him right out of the group. I have this thing in a frame in my house where I was thrown out of the spine group because I went in and I said, I can help you. The moderator threw me out. The last thing they want is to be helped. I guess I learned that hard there because the first group I went into when I first published that book was a fibromyalgia group. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to go and help some people. Well, what is it? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. They came at me like wounded badgers. And I've helped a lot of fibro people heal. But I realized why. I learned something from that. We learned something from even failure, right? Probably more from failure than from success, actually. But the little old lady that ran it, she was a sweet little old lady with a bun in her hair and the knitting needles, like that little sweet lady from Tweety Bird had. They were always talking about teas and which kind of pillows and which this will help. I realized, this was the reason this woman got up in the morning. And I took it away from her. There's a lot to be gained in suffering. The world just doesn't want to hear this message. Dr. Sarno never believed that it would take off. He said if it did, there would be economic collapse within the industry. And there would be, and it won't, of course. He talks about the orthopedic surgeons that he helped, and I've helped a few myself, but the orthopedic surgeon said to him, he was in serious pain, and Dr. Sarno got him out fast. And the surgeon said, I don't know what I'm going to do now. I got to go back to, it was either Arkansas or Oklahoma. Knowing what I know now, I don't know what to do. And Dr. Sarno said, good luck with that. But years later, he saw that orthopedic surgeon, he said. And he said, what did you ever do with that? And he said, well, if they think it's a mechanical structural problem, I deal with them that way. If they think it's a mind-body problem, I deal with it that way. He figured out a way to ride the fence, which I guess is half a step's better than no step, right? But there's a great story about this rabbi, Benzion Scheinfeld. I contacted him, by the way. He was so crippled with back pain, he was hunched over like this. He said, I was so depressed because I couldn't function, and I'm an athlete, and I can't do anything. So he went to a neurosurgeon who told him he had a fragmented disc in his back with the MRI. Fragmented, not herniated, broken off. I call them a floater. I call it fragmented. And so the surgeon said, you need immediate surgery or you're going to be paralyzed for the rest of your life if you move the wrong way. Well, he was like me. The only smart thing I ever did was avoid surgery. It's the only thing I avoided.
Personally, my 15 years of doing emotional healing client coaching, I'll certainly raise my hand and say I didn't specialize in working with addicts. Yes, I think we're all addicted to something. And at the beginning of this, I said, well, I haven't had addiction in my life. And then you mentioned workaholism. It's like, oh, yeah, I've been addicted to not seeing my addiction. So yeah,
Workaholism is the respectable addiction, by the way.
Sure. And yeah, maybe more functional than others. But nonetheless, realizing to some degree, all people are addicted to something if it's not a clinical problem. What I found with the folks I've worked with over the course of my 15 years of doing emotional healing work is what would heal the shame, what would heal the guilt, what would heal the anger and the fear is connection with thyself. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to just placate this and like, oh yeah, heal it, connect to yourself. It's like, yeah, great words that are very useless to say because it's a very much a journey. But I've personally really found value in encouraging people and working with myself in my life, looking at the emotions, the traumas, the wounding, and the pain that we still carry, whether we know it's there or it's there but we don't know it. But making connection with those emotions is a big connection because what we connect to when we're connecting to the emotions that are so painful and so intimidating is the part of us that holds that emotion. Right. I do a lot of inner child work. So it's like when I went through a wounding experience when I was 7, very shaming, disconnected from it for a couple decades because like when I was 7, I didn't know how to deal with intense shame. I didn't even know what it was. What I would realize is, wow, my whole 7-year-old inner child is not a part of my life. Mm-hmm. I'm very disconnected from him because I don't want to feel what he feels. Right. And the late John Bradshaw, you've probably gotten into some John Bradshaw work.
He was brilliant.
Yeah, so he has a quote that says, this might oversimplify it, but maybe not. All addiction is a symptom of not feeling what you're feeling. So I found when we can make connection to our feelings, especially those past pains and traumas, and feel the feelings. Feeling is the evidence of healing. It is a huge, huge, huge step of recovery. It's connecting to ourself and it's recovering thyself. And in my opinion, one of the biggest forms of hell on earth is living beside yourself. You not being connected to you. To me, it's a form of self-betrayal. And not to make this too much about me, but I'm going to make it a little bit more about me. Last night at the book signing, I was giving a talk, and someone asked me a question about my comedy. And the moral of the story was about 2.5 years ago when I started making comedy videos, it was a very important rite of passage of reconnecting with a part of me. Yeah. When I was 7, when I was 4, those young ages, I developed a sense of humor in order to disconnect from pain. Mm-hmm. And the more I would use humor, the funnier I got. I was getting more practice with it, but the more disconnected I was getting with myself. Let me cover up the pain with the dirt of humor. The flowers of humor. Cover up the dirt with the flowers of humor. Change the analogy. So I found when I reclaimed my inner comedian in a big way a couple of years ago, it was really reconnecting with like the wounded 7-year-old inner child that was covering himself up with the camouflage of comedy. Mm-hmm. And that's why when I'm not sure if y'all have heard me talk about like, my breakthrough making videos, it was something comedy videos, something I was so resistant to for so long. It was so scary to me, like, it'll discredit me professionally. But it was me connecting to me, another part of me in a big way. So maybe connection is a huge, huge, huge force of healing that we all need in our lives. And P.S., like, addicts too. So I talk, kind of haphazardly there because, again, haven't worked directly with addicts. That hasn't been my specialty, but just curious. Your thoughts on any of that ramble, my friend?
Well, I think a lot of people probably watch your comedy videos and can connect with it because they can see all of these things that they have pursued and that many people pursue, trying to find joy and enlightenment and connection. And you know that there's just a lot of crazy shit out there. Yeah. And it's and humor brings a lightness to it. And I believe humor is critical, especially when you're going through difficult, challenging times. Like if you're stressed or you're having a shitty day, I mean, the more you can inject laughter. I made that comment earlier. We were shooting videos earlier where, that whole saying, an apple a day will keep the doctor away, unless you realize the sugar in the apple could perhaps make you have to go there. Anyway,
and
there's that. But, laughter every day will probably keep the doctor away, and it'll really allow you to just feel alive. So if there's a cut or someone's cutting themselves, in some ways they don't feel, and they just need to feel, even if the feeling is pain. That is something other than feeling neglected and I'm not, there's many reasons why people cut. Okay. So I'm not trying to say that's the reason. It's just with connection, it's so critical.
Okay. So I'll ask you about relationships, married couples, family members, friends. How does Kolbe impact? How does it become a useful tool as it relates to getting along, staying together, having fun?
I've had people ask me, what's the right MO for me to marry? I had an offer several years ago, $20 million, if I would allow this guy to make a little handheld thing where you could walk into a bar and it would click if someone else in the room had the right MO for you. So it was a dating game. $20 million 20 years ago. I said, I can't do that. Why? There isn't a right or wrong MO in a personal relationship. There is a right or wrong attitude about an MO. If you don't respect the significant other for who she is, and you don't nurture that, and you don't provide opportunities for her to have the freedom to be herself, whatever her MO is.
Or his.
Or his. I was kind of talking to your eyeballs.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, whichever gender. If you don't give that freedom, and it comes with respect and dignity, if you don't do that, you shouldn't be in this relationship, because that's not a loving relationship. Right. What is love about? Love is about really caring for, value, and nurturing the other person. How do we show love? Not by what we say we feel. Oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. Yeah, show me. It's all about show me, and show me is conative. And you show me how much you love me by how much you give me the freedom to be myself, and how much you nurture that, and how many opportunities you provide for it. Or whether you say my way or the highway, or you say, I love you so much, but I can't let you do that, because that isn't what he or she needs. Sometimes your needs are in conflict, and we can measure that. We can tell you the degree of conflict, we can tell you the mode of conflict, and then, as I said, every time we see an issue, we give you a solution. We'll tell you what to do about it. Often it means this thing about togetherness. Was that the 70s or the 80s when togetherness came in? What a bunch of bull. You shouldn't be together a lot with someone if what he or she does drives you crazy. Right. You can love each other and not spend so much time together. So I tell people who have very conflicting, different MOs, when they travel together, if she wants to stay in the hotel while you go to the museums, don't make her go with you. Right. If he wants to read all the historical landmarks along the road, you get out and look at the flowers. You don't have to read it together. I always suggest meals together. So go on vacations, and because eating is a wonderful wonderful, but there's a whole cognitive thing to eating. But eating together is really important. The rest of the time, togetherness can mean we got there together, but then we...
Right.
My husband and I we both love art.
Yeah.
We will go to an art show. So we arrive together, we go our separate ways, and at the end we say, okay, we're going to get together at such and such a time. We get back together. But I can't do it the way he does it.
Right.
And that's worked so successfully. And then we can talk about the art and we can enjoy the art and we take each other back to see certain things of art. But we don't do art the same way.
Wow. That's actually cool. Well, so in a humorous way, can you use Colby to belittle people and make them feel bad about themselves?
Not in a humorous way, but seriously.
I'm just making a joke here right now.
That's not a joke. I won't go there. I like to be funny with you, but don't ever belittle anybody about their own.
I would recommend not doing that. Yeah, that's a good idea.
No, wait a minute. That's not true. Kathy, that's not true. We laugh all the time in our family about, yeah, that's just your follow through. Or, oh, your fact finder needs more information.
Right.
My grandkids tease David, the 8 in fact finder. They will say the moment you ask a question of Dad, instead of just, Grandma will give it to you right away, Mom will give it to them right. Dad will get out his computer and Google it and see how much information he can find to give you. You know, little kids, they've got his number. We all, by the way, I can tell MOs with my grandchildren within the first couple hours of their birth, but you can see in the way little kids play, because their play usually is striving. Conation only comes out when you strive. It does not come out in pure recreation. It doesn't come out when you're doing it just for the heck of it. It is the instinct to strive that brings out the conative. That's a very important point. So in a family, there are times we are not striving. And so we know each other's MOs, but you can't get me to come up with an idea if I'm in downtime, because I'm not going to go there. I don't have any ideas. Grandma, what are we going to do? You think up something. Grandma, you always have something. I don't feel like doing it, because I don't feel like doing it. And the affect kicks in the creative process. The way I view it is, if you don't care, you won't ever use your conative energy for something. So you can withhold your conative energy.
Okay. Talking about your grandchildren, if you...
Not that I ever like to do that.
No, I know that's your thing. You love your grandchildren. If you could only share a couple sentences or a paragraph of life advice for them, summarize it in a paragraph, what would it be? What would you say to them on how to live a fulfilling and successful, connected life?
I've written that for most of them on the day they were born, and I've written it for the older ones on the day they went to college, or whatever appropriate time. And it's pretty much always the same thing. Understand yourself and give yourself the freedom to do what you are destined to do. I mean, it's always words to the effect of fight for the freedom to be yourself. And yes, you often have to fight for that.
Awesome. What are you most proud of with your work? I mean, you've impacted, probably millions of lives.
I don't believe I've ever been asked that question before. What am I most proud of? I am most proud of what I'm going to do next year.
What are you going to do next year? Do you know?
I never know. Part of the answer to that is I know some things I want to do. I don't know exactly how I'll do them or how well I'll do them. I'm proud of the fact that I'm always thinking what I'm going to do next. And I kind of don't take pride in what I've done in the past, because that's the past. I take pride in what I'm going to be doing.
There's this old punk band, the Ramones. They had this, I don't care about history, that's not where I want to be. It's one of their lyrics.
But fact finders are proud of things in the past, and I don't begrudge them that, belittle it, or disdain it. It goes back to relationships. When I'm in a relationship, either a family relationship or a friendship or client, and I am praising them, I will praise a fact finder for something they've already done, because anything else is false praise to them because they haven't done it yet. I will praise a quick start for something they are going to do and thinking about doing, because the past means very little if you're not a fact finder. So you learn what and how to say things to people. And by the way, because I'm a little itty bitty too in fact finder, I don't live in the past and I don't remember specific details of a lot of things. It's just not what a two in fact finder does.
Right.
Means I can't hold a grudge.
Ah,
It's one of the blessings.
That's useful.
It is.
Yeah.
It's very good. I don't waste any energy on a grudge. I'll say, why don't we invite so-and-so to something? They'll say, Kathy, don't you remember what she did to you? No, what did she do? Well, 8 years ago, she, a fact finder in my 8 years ago, she did this, and I said, oh wow, I'm so glad I don't spend any time remembering that.
All right, so after everything we've talked about, what are the next steps for people that are listening to this, watching this, to take and to apply it?
Get to know your cognitive strengths. Go to info@kolbe.com if you want to talk about seminars or hearing a speech or the new things. But go to kolbe.com, click on Take the Kolbe A. Get your kids to go to the Kolbe Y. Have a family meeting. Get your employees together and do a seminar. I do them by Skype. We don't have to have the money of flying around. There are all kinds of ways we can, but take action. Hire the right people by using the Kolbe Right Fit program. Do it. What have you got? Well, I said to the Suns coach many years ago, what have you got to lose? Because they were losing so badly. And he said, okay, I guess, Kathy, last I looked, you're 5'3", but maybe you could help. That's when they went to the finals.
Wow.
One of their coaches said, I'm better than some 5'3" woman with a piece of technology. Listen to me, they've never gone back to the finals.
Okay, I hope you found that video awesome and useful. So if you want to get a free copy of my book, I want you to click here. And if you want to watch some more videos that'll be useful and awesome, click here. Go ahead. They're over here. Do it now. Come on. Thank you. Watch them.